My name is Harriet, and at 55 years old, I thought I knew everything about my son James and our unbreakable bond. Last Sunday, as I prepared our weekly family dinner, I was nervously excited about the important announcement he and his wife Sarah wanted to make. The aroma of pot roast filled our Victorian home where I had lived for 25 years, and candles flickered warmly on my grandmother's china. What I never expected was for them to declare they were moving in to take care of me, completely oblivious that I no longer owned the house they considered their future inheritance. Before I dive into this story that changed everything I believed about family loyalty, let me know where you are watching from around the world. Please hit that like button and subscribe because this dinner revelation will show you how quickly dreams can crumble when secrets finally surface. Tom and I purchased our beautiful two-story Victorian home in 1999, dreaming it would shelter our family for generations. We chose this house specifically for its spacious kitchen where we could host holiday gatherings, the cozy living room with its stone fireplace where James would build pillow forts, and the three generous bedrooms upstairs, including our master suite overlooking the garden. Tom spent countless weekends restoring the original hardwood floors and refinishing the built-in cabinets, pouring his heart into every detail. Our backyard became James's playground where Tom taught him to throw baseballs and catch fireflies during those magical summer evenings. When Tom died suddenly of a heart attack 8 years ago, my world collapsed entirely. James, only 21 at the time, became my emotional anchor through the devastating grief that followed. He called me every single day, brought groceries when I couldn't bear leaving the house, and fixed every squeaky door or leaky faucet without being asked. For years, it felt like James and I against an incredibly lonely world, and our mother-son bond seemed absolutely unshakable. When he married Sarah 3 years ago, I welcomed her with genuine enthusiasm, thrilled that my devoted son had found someone who brought such obvious joy to his life. Sarah initially seemed like the perfect daughter-in-law, always complimenting my cooking and asking thoughtful questions about our family history. She helped me sort through Tom's belongings when I finally felt emotionally ready and even suggested we frame some of his old photographs for the hallway. I genuinely believed I had gained a daughter, not just a daughter-in-law, and looked forward to years of growing closer as our family expanded with grandchildren who would play in the same rooms where James had grown up. But behind my grateful facade for their support, a devastating financial reality was slowly destroying everything Tom and I had built together. His funeral expenses had drained our modest savings account, and my widow's pension barely covered half of our monthly mortgage payment. Property taxes kept increasing every year, and our aging house demanded constant repairs I simply could not afford on my limited income. The beautiful home that had once represented security and legacy was becoming an impossible burden that threatened to leave me homeless and penniless. 2 years ago, facing inevitable foreclosure and complete financial ruin, I made the most painful decision of my entire life. I sold our cherished family home to Bay Point Properties, a local real estate investment company that specialized in purchasing homes from desperate sellers. However, I managed to negotiate an unusual arrangement that allowed me to remain as a tenant, essentially renting back the house that had been mine for over 2 decades. The monthly rent was significantly less than the mortgage payments had been making my situation financially manageable, while allowing me to stay in the home where every room held precious memories of Tom and James's childhood. The shame and humiliation of this arrangement was almost unbearable. How could I possibly explain to James that his childhood sanctuary, the inheritance he naturally expected to receive someday, had been sold to complete strangers out of my financial desperation? Every month when I wrote that rent check to Bay Point Properties, I felt like I was betraying both Tom's memory and James's future security. I kept telling myself I would find the perfect moment to reveal the truth, but days turned into weeks. Weeks became months, and the secret grew heavier with each passing conversation where James mentioned future plans for our family home. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear with that perfect autumn weather that had always reminded me of new beginnings and fresh possibilities. I spent the entire afternoon preparing James's absolute favorite meal, the same pot roast recipe I had been making since he was a little boy who would sneak pieces of carrots while I was not looking. The dining room looked absolutely perfect with my grandmother's best china carefully arranged the sterling silver that only appeared for special occasions, gleaming under the crystal chandelier and Tom's favorite brass candlesticks, creating a warm, inviting glow that made everything feel magical and intimate. Despite the beautiful setting, an undercurrent of anxiety ran through my preparations because James had been unusually mysterious about tonight's announcement. He had called 3 times during the week to confirm dinner plans, each time mentioning how excited both he and Sarah were to share their important news. His voice carried an enthusiasm I had not heard since their wedding day, which made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation about what could possibly have them both so thrilled and secretive. At exactly 6:30, just as I was lighting the final candle, I heard James's familiar key turning in the front door lock. His voice echoed through our hallway as he called out his traditional greeting, and within seconds he was wrapping me in one of those wonderful bear hugs that still made me feel like the most cherished mother in the world. Sarah followed close behind, carrying an expensive bottle of wine and practically glowing with barely contained excitement that made her seem like she might burst with whatever secret they were planning to reveal. Throughout the first course, both James and Sarah seemed unusually animated, constantly exchanging meaningful looks and barely suppressed smiles that suggested they were sharing some wonderful private joke. James kept complimenting the pot roast with even more enthusiasm than usual, while Sarah could not stop commenting on how beautiful everything looked, from the table setting to the way the candlelight reflected off the antique mirror above our sideboard. Their energy felt electric and contagious, filling the room with anticipation that made me increasingly curious about their mysterious announcement. But as dinner progressed, I began noticing subtle changes in how Sarah was observing our surroundings. Her eyes lingered on architectural details like the crown molding and hardwood floors with an expression I could not quite interpret, almost as if she was mentally cataloging or evaluating everything she saw. She made casual comments about the quality of our built-in china cabinet and asked detailed questions about when we had last updated the electrical system, and plumbing inquiries that seemed oddly specific for a simple dinner conversation. Halfway through our main course, James suddenly set down his fork with ceremonial precision and reached across the table to take Sarah's hand, both of them beaming with the kind of radiant joy I had not witnessed since their engagement announcement. He cleared his throat in that formal way he had always used before presenting important school projects or making significant pronouncements, and declared with tremendous pride that they had absolutely wonderful news to share with me tonight. My heart immediately leaped with excitement, assuming they were about to announce the pregnancy I had been secretly hoping for since their wedding. Instead of mentioning grandchildren, however, James stood up with great ceremony and announced that he and Sarah had made the beautiful decision to move in with me permanently. Not to visit more frequently or help out occasionally, but to completely relocate their entire lives into my house so they could provide proper care and companionship for their beloved mother. Sarah jumped up enthusiastically beside him, explaining how they had been planning this wonderful surprise for several months, determined to ensure I never felt lonely or overwhelmed by household responsibilities again. Before I could even process this unexpected announcement, Sarah disappeared briefly to retrieve something from their car and returned with a thick manila folder stuffed with architectural blueprints, color-coordinated paint samples, and glossy furniture catalogs. She spread these materials across my dining table with the excited energy of someone planning their dream wedding, pointing out detailed drawings that showed exactly how they intended to transform my small home office into a luxurious master bedroom suite complete with a private bathroom and walk-in closet. James eagerly joined the presentation, explaining with obvious pride how they had researched every aspect of their renovation plans, from converting my living room into a comfortable bedroom space for me to installing a sophisticated Murphy bed that could fold away during daytime hours. They had already contacted licensed contractors, obtained preliminary cost estimates, and even researched the permit requirements for their proposed structural modifications. Their thoroughness was both impressive and absolutely heartbreaking given what I knew they did not. Sarah showed me detailed sketches of how they planned to partition the upstairs bathroom to create separate his and hers vanities, install a kitchenette area near my new downstairs sleeping quarters, and even add a private side entrance so I could maintain some independence while they managed all household operations. James enthusiastically described taking over mortgage payments, handling all maintenance issues, and ensuring I never again worried about any aspects of home ownership or financial management. Their presentation continued for nearly 30 minutes, with both of them growing more animated as they shared their vision for our newly configured family home. They had considered every possible detail, from installing grab bars in bathrooms for my future safety needs to creating a dedicated space where I could display Tom's photographs and personal belongings. Their love and concern felt absolutely genuine, making the devastating truth I needed to share even more painful and the inevitable disappointment even more heartbreaking for everyone involved. When I finally found the courage to interrupt their enthusiastic planning session, the shift in atmosphere was immediately palpable and deeply uncomfortable. I started as gently as possible, explaining that while I was deeply touched by their generous offer and obvious love, there were some important financial realities they needed to understand before making any concrete plans. James's expression slowly changed from pure excitement to growing confusion as I began describing the mounting expenses and impossible financial pressures I had faced since Tom's unexpected death. Sarah's radiant smile gradually faded as I carefully explained how widow's benefits and retirement income had proven completely inadequate for maintaining a large home with increasing property taxes, constant repair needs, and rising utility costs. I watched their faces as understanding began to dawn that something was seriously wrong with the foundation of their carefully constructed dreams, though they still had no idea how completely their plans had already been derailed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The moment I finally revealed that I had been forced to sell our family home to Bay Point Properties 2 years earlier and was currently living here as a tenant rather than an owner, the silence that followed felt absolutely suffocating. James stared at me as if I had just announced that everything he believed about his childhood and family history had been an elaborate lie, his mind clearly struggling to process how his inheritance, his security, his future had simply evaporated without his knowledge or input. Sarah's reaction was even more dramatic and immediately concerning, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and what appeared to be rapidly building anger as she began to grasp the full implications of my revelation. The architectural drawings that had seemed so hopeful and exciting just moments earlier now lay scattered across the table like debris from a demolished building, their careful measurements and optimistic color schemes suddenly rendered completely meaningless by this devastating new information. James was the first to break the terrible silence, asking in a voice barely above a whisper why I had never mentioned any of these financial struggles or included him in such a monumentally important decision. His hurt was visible and completely understandable as he wondered aloud how I could have sold his childhood home, his expected inheritance, his emotional anchor, without even consulting him about alternatives or asking for his help and support. I tried desperately to explain the overwhelming shame I felt about failing to maintain what Tom had worked so hard to provide, how I could not bear the thought of disappointing him with my financial incompetence, and how I had kept hoping to somehow solve the problem before he ever needed to know about it. But my explanation sounded weak and inadequate even to my own ears, and I could see that my well-intentioned secrecy had only made an already difficult situation exponentially worse for everyone involved in this heartbreaking family crisis. What happened during the next hour revealed aspects of both James and Sarah's personalities that I had never seen before, and frankly, never wanted to discover, especially under such painful circumstances. Sarah's initial shock and disappointment quickly transformed into something much more aggressive and accusatory as she began systematically questioning every financial decision I had made since becoming a widow. Her inquiries felt less like genuine concern for my welfare and more like a hostile interrogation designed to assign blame for the destruction of their inheritance expectations. She demanded to know why I had not immediately asked James for financial assistance, why I had not explored alternative solutions like reverse mortgages or family loans, and why I had not been more forthcoming about my struggles instead of allowing them to build their entire future around assumptions that were no longer valid. But her questions carried an undertone of entitlement and accusation that made it clear she viewed my financial difficulties as personal failures rather than unfortunate circumstances largely beyond my control. James, clearly torn between loyalty to his mother and bitter disappointment about his completely shattered expectations, began supporting Sarah's increasingly harsh criticism of my choices and decision-making process. He pointed out that I could have moved to a smaller, more affordable apartment instead of selling our irreplaceable family home to strangers who had no emotional connection to its history. He questioned why I had maintained the same comfortable lifestyle after Tom's death instead of making more dramatic sacrifices to preserve what he considered family assets rather than my personal property. Every suggestion felt like a dagger piercing my heart, especially coming from the son I had sacrificed everything to raise, with love, support, and endless devotion. James seemed to have completely forgotten the countless times I had put his needs and wants before my own comfort, the years I had worked extra shifts to pay for his college education, and the unwavering support I had provided through every challenge and disappointment he had ever faced during his 29 years of life. But it was Sarah who delivered the most brutal and unfair assessment of my situation, accusing me of being fundamentally irresponsible with what she characterized as family assets that belonged to everyone rather than my personal property to dispose of as I saw fit. According to her twisted logic, I had no right to make independent decisions about the house Tom and I had purchased, maintained, and loved for over 2 decades, regardless of my desperate financial circumstances or complete lack of viable alternatives. She spoke with righteous indignation about my obligations as a mother and potential grandmother, conveniently ignoring the fact that neither she nor James had ever contributed a single dollar toward household expenses, property taxes, maintenance costs, or any other aspects of home ownership during the difficult years following Tom's death. Their criticism felt especially cruel given that they had never once offered financial assistance or even asked about my struggles until their own plans were threatened by the consequences of my survival strategies. The evening reached its most devastating point when Sarah actually suggested that I should find a way to purchase the house back from Bay Point Properties, as if I possessed some secret reservoir of wealth that I had been hiding for purely dramatic effect. She proposed that I take out personal loans, ask extended family members for money, or explore legal options to reclaim what she boldly characterized as my fundamental responsibility to preserve the family legacy for future generations, completely ignoring the financial realities that had forced the sale in the first place. James enthusiastically endorsed this completely unrealistic suggestion, apparently believing that desperation and guilt could somehow magically generate the substantial financial resources I had never possessed, even during Tom's lifetime, when we had 2 full incomes. His support for Sarah's impossible demands showed me how completely he had lost sight of my actual circumstances and how thoroughly his wife had influenced his perception of what constituted reasonable expectations for his widowed mother's capabilities. When I patiently explained that purchasing back the house was absolutely impossible given my limited retirement income and complete absence of savings or creditworthiness, Sarah's frustration erupted into outright hostility and personal attacks. She declared that I had fundamentally failed in my basic duty as a mother to preserve my children's inheritance and accused me of being selfish, short-sighted, and financially irresponsible in ways that had damaged the entire family's future security and prosperity. The woman who had been calling me mom for 3 years and sending me Mother's Day cards suddenly felt completely comfortable telling me exactly what she thought of my life, choices, my character, and my worth as both a mother and a human being. None of her assessment was kind, fair, or based on any realistic understanding of the impossible circumstances I had been navigating alone since Tom's death, but James sat there nodding in agreement instead of defending the mother who had devoted her entire adult life to his welfare and happiness. James's betrayal cut far deeper than Sarah's attacks because I had naturally expected better from the son I had raised with unconditional love, countless sacrifices, and unwavering support through every challenge he had ever faced. Instead of showing compassion for my impossible situation or defending me against his wife's unreasonable criticism, he joined her in questioning my priorities, my decision-making abilities, and my fundamental competence as both a homeowner and a mother. Their proposed solution was as heartless as it was completely impractical and self-serving. Sarah announced that I should immediately relocate to live with my sister in Arizona, effectively removing myself from their lives so they could somehow negotiate with Bay Point Properties about purchasing or renting the house for themselves. They would generously allow me to visit occasionally during holidays, treating me like a welcome guest in what had been my beloved home for over 2 decades, while they claimed ownership of the life Tom and I had built together. The casual, matter-of-fact way they discussed shipping me off to desert retirement while they took control of my living situation was absolutely breathtaking in its audacity and complete disregard for my feelings, preferences, or basic human dignity. But what truly opened my eyes was the growing realization that this was not a spontaneous reaction to disappointing news, but rather a carefully planned conversation they had been preparing for months, while pretending to love and support me unconditionally. Something fundamental and irreversible shifted deep inside my soul as I sat there listening to my son and his wife discuss my future, like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture they needed to relocate to make room for their more important possessions. The hurt, shame, and self-doubt I had been carrying for years suddenly crystallized into a fierce clarity and determination I had not experienced since the early days of my grief, when survival itself had required every ounce of strength I possessed. These two people who claimed to love me unconditionally had just spent the entire evening demonstrating exactly how little they actually respected me as an independent adult, capable of making my own decisions about my own life. Their behavior revealed that they viewed me primarily as a source of potential inheritance, rather than a human being deserving of basic dignity and consideration, and that revelation liberated me from any obligation to protect their feelings or meet their unrealistic expectations. I stood up slowly and deliberately, placing my hands firmly on the dining room table where their architectural dreams and presumptuous plans lay scattered like debris, and announced in a calm but unmistakably determined voice that this conversation had been extremely educational in ways they probably had not intended. For the first time all evening, both James and Sarah fell completely silent, perhaps sensing that the dynamic in the room was about to shift dramatically and permanently. I told them that their reactions and demands tonight had shown me exactly what they truly thought of me as both a person and a mother, and that this newfound knowledge was going to guide every single decision I made about our relationships moving forward. Then I did something that surprised everyone in the room, including myself, by walking directly to the kitchen phone and dialing Bay Point Properties' 24-hour emergency maintenance line. Mr. Davidson, the property manager who handled my rental agreement, answered on the second ring and listened patiently as I explained that I needed to modify my lease agreement to include a specific clause prohibiting overnight guests without written permission from the management company, effective immediately. James and Sarah stood frozen in complete shock as they listened to me calmly discussing lease modifications that would make their moving-in plan not just difficult, but legally impossible. Mr. Davidson proved surprisingly accommodating and understanding, explaining that many elderly tenants requested similar protective clauses against family members who might attempt to take advantage of their housing situations or create unwanted complications with property management companies. He assured me that the new restrictive clause would be formally added to my lease agreement within 24 hours and that any violations would result in immediate eviction proceedings, giving me strong legal grounds to refuse any unwanted house guests, regardless of their relationship to me. After ending the phone call, I turned back to face two very different people than the ones who had arrived for dinner just a few hours earlier with their exciting announcement and generous offer. James looked genuinely shocked that his mother possessed both the knowledge and the determination to protect herself legally from manipulation and exploitation, while Sarah appeared absolutely furious that I had successfully outmaneuvered their carefully orchestrated plans with a simple phone call. But I was far from finished asserting my newfound independence and demanding the basic respect I deserved as both a human being and the woman who had raised James with love and sacrifice. I looked directly at my son and told him how profoundly disappointed I was that he had allowed his wife to manipulate him into treating his own mother with such disrespect and cruelty. I reminded him of the countless sacrifices I had made while raising him alone after his father's death, the times I had worked double shifts to pay for his education and activities, and the unconditional love and support I had always provided regardless of his choices or circumstances. Then I explained that his behavior tonight had revealed aspects of his character I had never seen before, and they were not aspects I was willing to tolerate or enable in my own home regardless of our family relationship. Turning to Sarah, I completely abandoned any pretense of politeness or family harmony and told her exactly what I thought of her manipulative schemes, her entitled attitude toward property that had never belonged to her, and her presumptuous demands about how I should live my life and spend my money. I made it absolutely clear that her opinions about my financial decisions were both irrelevant and unwelcome, that her presence in my house was no longer desired under any circumstances, and that she should never again presume to lecture me about my responsibilities or obligations. Then, I walked directly to the front door, opened it wide and politely but firmly asked them both to leave my home immediately and not return until they could demonstrate basic respect for my autonomy and dignity. The week that followed brought an unexpected mixture of relief, sadness, and gradually growing strength as I processed everything that had happened during that life-changing dinner and began to understand its broader implications for my future relationships and self-perception. I spent Monday morning methodically cleaning up the scattered architectural drawings and paint samples they had left behind, throwing away the evidence of their presumptuous plans with a deep satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity and finality. The house felt genuinely peaceful for the first time in months, truly mine, in a way it had not felt while I harbored the heavy secret of its sale and dreaded the inevitable moment when I would have to reveal the truth and disappoint everyone I loved. Now that the worst had happened and I had survived it with my dignity intact, I could finally relax and enjoy my beautiful surroundings without the constant anxiety that had been poisoning my daily happiness and mental peace. James called on Wednesday evening, his voice subdued and genuinely apologetic as he attempted to explain his behavior and begin the long process of repairing our severely damaged relationship. Our conversation lasted nearly 2 hours as we both struggled to understand how we had reached such a painful and seemingly insurmountable breaking point in our previously close mother-son bond. He admitted that Sarah had been pressuring him for months about securing their financial future, and that he had unwisely allowed her anxieties and demands to cloud his judgment about what was reasonable to expect from his widowed mother. His apology felt sincere and heartfelt, though I made it absolutely clear that rebuilding trust between us would require significant time, consistent effort, and fundamental changes in how he approached our relationship and his responsibilities as an adult son. While I would always love him unconditionally as my child, I explained that I could no longer respect him unconditionally as an adult, and that this crucial distinction would necessarily shape all our future interactions in ways he was only beginning to understand and accept. What James could not apologize for, however, was the fundamental shift in how I now viewed him as both a person and a family member. The son who had once been my greatest source of pride and comfort had revealed himself capable of breathtaking selfishness and cruelty when his own interests and expectations were threatened by circumstances beyond anyone's control. While my maternal love remained constant and unwavering, my respect for his character had been permanently damaged in ways that would take years to repair, if such repair was even possible. Sarah never called, never apologized, and never acknowledged that her behavior might have been inappropriate, hurtful, or fundamentally wrong in any way. Her complete silence spoke volumes about her true character and confirmed my growing suspicions that her sweet daughter-in-law persona had been carefully constructed and maintained solely to gain access to family resources she had always considered partially hers by virtue of her marriage to James. In the weeks and months that followed, I found myself reconnecting with parts of my identity and personality that had been dormant or suppressed since Tom's death, and the beginning of my financial struggles. I reached out to old friends I had neglected during my darkest period, joined a support group for widowed women facing similar challenges, and even started volunteering at the local senior center where my organizational skills and natural empathy made me genuinely useful to people navigating their own difficult transitions. For the first time in years, my days felt purposeful and my relationships felt authentic, rather than obligatory or based on guilt and family expectations. I discovered that I actually enjoyed my own company, and that solitude did not necessarily mean loneliness when it was chosen rather than imposed by circumstances. The house that I had once seen as a symbol of my failure and shame became a peaceful sanctuary where I could rebuild my confidence, independence, and sense of self-worth without constantly worrying about other people's judgments or demands. Most importantly, I learned that genuine happiness and fulfillment did not require the approval, presence, or financial support of people who did not truly value me as an individual human being deserving of respect and consideration. James and I eventually managed to rebuild a cautious, careful relationship based on clearer boundaries and mutual respect, but it required months of honest conversations, hurt feelings, and gradual trust building that fundamentally changed the nature of our connection forever. Sarah remained permanently excluded from my life and my home, a decision that initially caused James considerable pain, but ultimately strengthened our ability to connect authentically without her toxic influence constantly poisoning our interactions and manipulating his perceptions of what constituted appropriate family loyalty and obligation. The entire experience taught me that sometimes the most loving and constructive thing you can do for family members is refuse to enable their worst impulses and most selfish behaviors, even when such refusal causes temporary pain and conflict. By standing up for myself that evening and protecting my basic dignity, I had forced James to confront his own character flaws and choose between personal growth and continued selfishness and entitlement. Looking back now with the wisdom that comes from surviving crisis and emerging stronger, I understand that losing the house I had shared with Tom for over 2 decades was actually the beginning of finding myself as an independent, capable woman rather than simply a widow defined primarily by her losses and limitations. Sometimes, the foundation you lose becomes the solid ground where you finally learn to stand strong and proud on your own 2 feet, supported by your own courage, rather than other people's expectations or approval. Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and protecting your own dignity and self-respect? What would you do if you discovered that people you trusted had been planning to take advantage of your generosity without ever asking what you actually needed or wanted from them? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own family challenges, please give it a like and subscribe for more real stories about finding unexpected strength in life's most difficult moments. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to stand up for yourself and demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth as a human being is not determined by what you can give to others, but by how courageously you choose to value and protect yourself. May you always find the strength to build the life you truly deserve to live.